The first crack didn't sound like a crack. It sounded like my mother saying my name a little too slowly. "Lunas, are you okay? You seem tired lately." I remember smiling when she said it, because at that time, I was the happiest I had ever been. I was newly married, in love, safe. Or at least I thought I was. My husband and I didn't have a dramatic love story. No chasing. No games. Just a quiet understanding that felt rare. He was successful, financially secure in a way that made people around us speak softer, smile wider. But with me, he was simple, gentle. The kind of man who listened when I spoke, who remembered how I took my coffee, who reached for my hand in public like he was proud to be seen with me. We laughed a lot in those early months. Real laughter. The kind that fills rooms and annoys neighbors. My family seemed happy too. My father kept saying, "You're settled now." My mother called me every day. My sister, my only sibling, was suddenly very involved in my life. Too involved. At first, it felt like love. "Don't forget who stood by you," my sister would say, smiling. "We just want to protect you," my mother added. Protect me from what? I didn't know. But I trusted them. They were my family. That was my first mistake. The changes were slow. So slow I didn't notice when they started shaping my thoughts. My mother would casually ask, "Does he check your phone?" My sister once said, "Men like him always hide something." I laughed it off, because my husband had never raised his voice at me, never controlled me, never made me feel small. But once a thought is planted, it doesn't need truth to grow. It just needs repetition. Soon my husband started changing too. Not in his actions, but in his silence. He'd look at me like he was searching for something behind my words. Sometimes, he'd pause before answering, as if weighing whether honesty was worth the fight it might cause. "Did you tell your family everything?" he asked me once. I remember the way my chest tightened. "Of course," I said. "Why?" He didn't answer, just nodded, smiled, walked away. That night, I cried quietly in the bathroom, not because he'd hurt me, but because I felt something slipping and didn't know how to hold it. Arguments followed, not loud ones, the dangerous kind, the calm, controlled, emotionally exhausting ones. "You don't trust me," I said. "You hide things," he replied. "What things?" Exactly. We'd go in circles until we were both too tired to continue. And every time I left his house upset, my family was ready. My mother's voice would soften. My sister's eyes would harden. "That's emotional manipulation, Luna. He's gaslighting you. You deserve better." They said the words with such confidence, I started borrowing their certainty. I didn't notice how they never asked what I felt, only what I should feel. My husband began pulling away, not for me, but for my family. "They don't like me," he said one night. "That's not true," I replied too quickly. But doubt had already settled between us, like a third presence at the table. The final fight wasn't explosive. It was quiet, devastatingly quiet. He said, "I don't recognize us anymore." I said, "Neither do I." We sat across from each other, two people still in love, but bleeding from wounds neither of us had caused directly. When we decided to divorce, my family didn't cry. That should have scared me. Instead, they acted relieved. My sister hugged me and whispered, "You're free now." My mother said, "This was inevitable." I felt numb. I signed the papers with shaking hands, telling myself this was life. That love sometimes fails. That not everything needs a villain. I moved back into my parents' house. That was when the real story began. Because grief makes you quiet. And quiet people notice things loud people miss. I noticed my mother correcting my memories. My sister slipping during conversations, mentioning things she shouldn't know. My father avoiding my eyes whenever my ex-husband's name came up. One night, while scrolling through my phone, I found an old message thread. Something was missing. A message I clearly remembered sending wasn't there. That's when a cold realization settled into my bones. Maybe my marriage didn't fall apart. Maybe it was pushed. And the hands that pushed it were the same ones that had held me my entire life. People think grief is loud. crying, screaming, breaking things. But my grief was silent. It sat beside me at breakfast. It followed me down hallways. It listened while my family spoke for me. Living back in my parents' house felt familiar and wrong, like wearing clothes that used to fit but now choked me at the collar. My mother watched me constantly, not in an obvious way, in the way someone watches a fire they think might restart. "You're eating less," she said one morning. "You're sleeping too much," she said another night. Always observing, always recording. My sister, on the other hand, acted like a winner. She spoke louder now, laughed more, took up space like she'd earned it. "You're lighter," she told me once. "Divorce suits you." I smiled, but inside, something cold shifted. Because I wasn't lighter. I was emptier. And emptiness leaves room for questions. It started with my phone. One evening, while transferring old photos to my laptop, I noticed gaps in dates. Entire conversations missing. Threads shortened. Context gone. At first, I blamed myself. Stressed as that, right? Memory fails. Details blur. But then I found an old backup on a cloud account I barely used. And there it was. Messages between my husband and me that no longer existed on my phone. Screenshots I had taken. Proof of conversations where we clarified misunderstandings. Conversations he later accused me of deleting. My hands started shaking. Because I remembered the fight. He had said, "Why would you erase that?" And I had sworn I didn't. I had believed I was forgetful. I wasn't. Someone else had access to my phone. The house suddenly felt too quiet. I didn't confront anyone. Not yet. I started watching instead. Listening. When my mother spoke about my ex-husband, she slipped just slightly. "He never replied after that message," she said once. I froze. "What message?" I asked casually. She paused. "Just a second too long." "The one where you told him you needed space," she said. I never sent that message. But she didn't know that I knew. My sister was sloppier. One night, while pretending to scroll on her phone, she laughed and said, "Men always react badly when you threaten divorce." I looked up slowly. "I never threatened divorce," I said. She blinked.
"Oh,
"I thought you did."
no." She knew I did.
Because she wrote it. My chest burned, not with anger, but with something sharper. Betrayal doesn't always arrive as pain. Sometimes it arrives as clarity. I began reconstructing the past like a crime scene. Who had access to my phone? Who encouraged me to share passwords for safety? Who always insisted I vent to them before talking to my husband? Every path led back to the same place. My family. The people who kissed my forehead when I cried. The people who told me they wanted the best for me. I thought of how my sister would ask about our finances. How my mother would question his generosity. How my father would warn me about power imbalance. None of it was wrong on the surface. That's the genius of manipulation. It wears the costume of concern. Then I found the email. Buried deep. Almost deleted. An email sent from my account to my husband's assistant.
Cold.
Formal.
Accusatory.
It questioned financial transparency. Suggested legal review. Implied distrust. I never wrote it. But the damage was done. My husband had responded politely, then distantly, then not at all. I sat on my bed, staring at the screen, feeling like I was seeing my life from above. All those fights. All those silences. All those nights we cried separately in the same room. Manufactured. My family didn't want my marriage to fail because they hated my husband. They wanted control. Over me. Over access. Over the version of me that had started slipping out of their hands. I had married into independence. And independence terrifies people who survive on influence. Still, I said nothing. That was the hardest part. Pretending I didn't know while sitting at dinner, listening to my sister rewrite my pain as her victory. Pretending I didn't see my mother relax now that I was back under her roof. Pretending I didn't notice how they talked about my ex-husband like he was a closed chapter, while I was still bleeding on every page. One night, I looked at my reflection and barely recognized myself.
Divorced. Displaced.
But not broken. Not anymore. Because once you see the strings, you can learn how to pull them back. I opened a new note on my phone. I titled it, Truth. I started documenting everything.
Dates.
Slip-ups. Inconsistencies. Evidence. I wasn't angry yet. I was focused. And that scared me more than rage ever could. Because I realized something then, something important. They thought they had ruined me. What they didn't know was that they had finally made me dangerous. I learned quickly that the world listens to the quiet ones more than the loud ones. And in my family's case, their arrogance was deafening. By the time I decided to act, I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to confront anyone directly. I only needed patience and precision. I started small. Nothing too obvious. Nothing that would alert them to the storm that was gathering. First, I rebuilt my life outside the walls of my childhood home. I rented a small apartment in the city, a space of my own where no one had access. I found a job that I could excel at without anyone watching over me. Every email, every call, every meeting was mine alone. Then I started gathering evidence. Bank statements, screenshots, backups, old messages, legal documents, anything that could confirm the lies, the manipulation, the calculated efforts my family had made to destroy my marriage. I also observed them closely. They had habits, of course. Arrogance made them sloppy. The way my mother would check my apartment under the guise of helping when she visited. The way my sister bragged about controlling situations she didn't even understand. The way my father always left his laptop logged in, thinking no one would notice. Each mistake became a thread I could pull. I knew patience was my ally. Rushing would spoil the outcome. This wasn't about revenge for the sake of anger. This was about clarity. About justice. About showing them exactly what it feels like to underestimate someone they believed they owned. The first step was the truth about my divorce. My ex-husband had agreed to meet me once for coffee. Not because he wanted to, but because something about the calm in my messages intrigued him. I never admitted I knew the full story. I simply said, "Let's talk. I think you deserve to hear the truth." He arrived, cautious. He expected bitterness, maybe tears. But I gave him neither. I gave him facts. Dates, screenshots, messages. The evidence that my family had been the architects of our breakdown. He sat there, stunned, silent. I don't know what to say," he finally whispered. "Then don't say anything," I said. "Just understand. It wasn't us. It was them." The shock in his eyes was satisfying, not because I wanted him to feel pain, but because finally, the truth existed outside the shadows. And once truth exists, it cannot be erased. Next, I targeted my sister. She thrived on the illusion of control. Over me, over conversations, over how our family perceived my life. I began dropping small, strategic hints. Nothing direct. A mention to mutual friends about how carefully some family members handle other people's finances. A casual comment in the office about privacy breaches in personal communications. Slowly, her own words came back to haunt her. She began second-guessing herself. Friends started noticing her nervousness. Her pride, once her armor, started cracking. I didn't have to confront her. She confronted herself. My mother was more difficult. She was subtle, patient, experienced. But even the cleverest predators can be undone by evidence and by public exposure. I documented everything I could. The times she overstepped, the manipulations she justified as care, the gaslighting moments that made me doubt myself. Then, I began letting them surface, not all at once, but carefully, in ways that left no room for denial. One evening, I invited my mother to lunch. I carried my laptop. We spoke casually at first, but then I opened a folder. It contained everything: emails, screenshots, transaction records, messages, notes I had kept since the first suspicious moment. She went pale. Her hands shook. She tried to laugh it off, tried to twist the story like she always did. But now I had context. I had proof. And for the first time, she realized that I wasn't a frightened daughter anymore. "I trusted you," I said quietly, carefully choosing each word. You destroyed my life. My marriage.
My peace.
And for what?
Control? Money?
Pride. She couldn't answer. She just stared. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't even ask for an apology. I only gave her the look of someone who sees every lie and will not forget a single one. And in that silence, she understood. The truth is heavier than any punishment. It doesn't require force. It doesn't require vengeance. It simply exists, and the guilty cannot escape it. My father tried to intervene later, claiming ignorance, claiming I had misunderstood. But I had recorded him too, conversations he thought were private. When I played them back, his own voice betrayed him. He tried to justify, to minimize. I just watched. By the end of the week, he was no longer giving me orders, no longer pretending to protect me. He had learned that manipulation has limits, and I had crossed them quietly, completely, irreversibly. By the time I was done, I didn't feel vindictive. I felt free.
Light.
Unburdened.
They weren't destroyed by me.
They were destroyed by the consequences of their own actions. And for the first time in months, I could breathe. I moved forward with the life I wanted, independently, not bitterly, not angrily, but with the quiet satisfaction of someone who survived betrayal, learned from it, and finally reclaimed what was theirs. I didn't need to tell anyone my story. I didn't need to prove my intelligence, my cleverness, my resilience. It was visible in my calm, in the choices I made, in the life I started building for myself, without relying on anyone who had ever tried to control me. Sometimes I still think of my ex-husband. We never got back together.
We don't text. We don't call.
But he respects me now. And that, more than anything, reminds me that truth is power, sometimes more than love, more than money, more than fear. And sometimes it's quiet, because the most dangerous storms arrive softly, silently, and leave only clarity in their wake. Freedom doesn't arrive like happiness. Happiness laughs. Freedom exhales. The day I truly felt free wasn't dramatic. There were no tears, no speeches, no final confrontations. It was a quiet morning in my apartment, sunlight spilling across the floor, coffee cooling in my hands. And for the first time in my life, no one needed anything from me. No expectations. No guilt. No emotional debt. Just me. I had cut contact slowly, intentionally, not out of rage, but out of self-respect. Phone calls unanswered. Messages left on read. Invitations politely declined until they stopped coming at all. My family didn't scream. They didn't apologize either. They did something worse. They minimized. Why are you holding on to the past? Families make mistakes. You're being dramatic. That's when I knew I had done the right thing. Because people who truly regret hurting you don't rush you into forgiveness. They sit with the damage. I didn't owe them healing. I owed myself peace. My life began expanding in ways I hadn't planned. I grew confident. Not loud confidence, but grounded confidence. The kind that doesn't need validation. The kind that doesn't explain itself. At work, I was promoted faster than expected. My boss once told me, "You're steady. Under pressure, you don't shake." I almost smiled. If only he knew. I rebuilt friendships I had neglected during my marriage. I made new ones who knew me only as Luna, not someone's daughter, not someone's wife, not someone's project. Just Luna. Sometimes people ask about my divorce. I don't tell them the full story. I simply say, it taught me how important truth is. And that's enough. Months later, I ran into my ex-husband unexpectedly. Not planned. Not dramatic. Just two people standing in the same bookstore aisle, reaching for the same novel. We laughed awkwardly. He looked different.
Comer.
Older somehow. "So," he said gently, "how are you?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized something surprised me. I wasn't aching anymore. "I'm good," I said honestly. "I really am." We sat for coffee. Not to reopen wounds, but to close them properly this time. "I'm sorry," he said, "for not fighting harder, for believing things too easily." "I'm sorry too," I replied. for letting others speak louder than my own heart. There was no bitterness, no regret heavy enough to sink us. Just understanding. We didn't get back together.
And that was okay.
Because some people aren't meant to return. They're meant to remind you who you were before the world interfered. As for my family, the punishment they feared never came. No public humiliation. No screaming matches. No revenge speech. Instead, they lost access to my life, my emotions, my future. My sister reached out once, months later. "I miss you," she wrote. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back, "I miss who I thought you were." And I blocked her. My mother sent a long voice note, tears, explanations, excuses wrapped in love. I listened once. I never replied. Not because I hated her, but because I finally understood something crucial. Closure is not something you receive. It's something you decide. And I had decided. I moved cities. I redecorated my apartment. I changed my routines. Not to escape my past, but to honor the woman who survived it. Sometimes, late at night, I think about the girl I used to be. The one who trusted blindly. The one who believed family could never be the enemy. The one who thought love was something you had to protect at any cost, even if it cost you yourself. I don't judge her. I thank her, because she endured what I didn't know how to fight yet.
And now?
Now I know. I know that betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it wears your last name. Sometimes it eats at your table. Sometimes it says, "I'm doing this for your own good." But I also know this. You don't need revenge to win. You don't need approval to heal. And you don't need permission to walk away from people who break you quietly. The most satisfying ending isn't watching them fall. It's watching yourself rise. Calm, intact, and no longer reachable. My name is Luna. I was married. I was divorced. I was betrayed by the people I trusted most. And I didn't let that define me. I let it refine me. If my story taught me anything, it's that your peace matters more than anyone else's approval. So, if you've ever been betrayed or manipulated by the people you trusted most, don't stay silent. Stand up, reclaim your life, and never let anyone dim your light. If you relate to what I went through, like this video, comment your story, and subscribe, because sometimes sharing our truths is the first step to freedom.